Welcome back to the Driven Leadership Podcast, everybody. We are back with a long-awaited, by us at least, part 2 of the Impostor Syndrome podcast. In case you missed it, go back to the first episode of this year in January, and we started going through these types of imposter syndromes, and so we will finish that list today and tag on the end kind of some practicalities of what to do with this wealth of knowledge now that we have enlightened you. So we're joined back today with the crew, Eric, Mary, Austin. How's everybody feeling? We are now caught up, so this is live. We're at the end of January. How's the start of the year been for everybody?
Yeah, good. Busy.
Yeah, busy is an understatement. I thought you were going to hype it up a little bit more, like we're dying inside, but
yeah.
I took 2 days off. I'm refilled up.
Yeah. We had so it wound up being 6 trainings back to back, and I haven't done 6 with really no breaks. I mean, there was a day here or there, but and then we had a bowl that got snowed out, so we did not get to do that. But I think it all worked out the way it was supposed to.
Yes, absolutely.
Pretty fried by the time we were getting
unintentional, but appreciated break in the schedule.
Yep.
Unintentional and appreciated rest.
Yes.
Yeah.
I slept 10 hours. I never sleep 10 hours ever. I get like 6 hours a night.
We have all these university sports teams, which is the coolest thing ever, to go in and just be at these crazy universities and then meet these players, these high level athletes. A lot of them going pro. Like it's just cool, like to even be in that space. And I don't ever second guess it. But as a business, it's so hard because they have that we're in their preseason. So it's basically January, maybe a little bit into February. And it's August, maybe a little bit into July. So we get this crazy spike on certain trainings, and there's no way to really duplicate it, So it's like Mary and I run around. So we just take a few, the coaches that we love that are amazing, and we get to play with them. So it's a good time.
What you also just said, just for everybody listening, that may be a coach for athletic team. If you've reached out to us and we didn't do your training, it's because we do not love you.
No.
No,
but I mean, we have coaches that do reach out, and we don't chase them. Like if they reach out and they're interested, we kind of tell them what we're doing. If they're interested, then we kind of dig in with them, because if a coach wants us to fix their team, that's not what we do. What we do is we work with the coaches and we support them with their team. It's all about the coaches. And when the coaches level up, it's crazy what happens. Yeah. But anyway, and so it's this different type of coach. You get these autocratic, controlling, dictatorial coaches. God love you, and they can win with that, but that's not where we play.
That's not our jam.
But it's not what we're good at.
And we actually got to work with Olympians.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had some Olympians in this last class.
They actually got 5th in the world in the Olympics. It was pretty
cool.
And they played. So that was beach volleyball, and they played in Paris underneath the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
We were watching them, like rooting them on. But they're the coolest girls. They just are.
So
They're good people. They're just people, but they're awesome.
Very cool. Well, let's jump into it. As a slight recap to not only the first episode, but this month. In January, we've kind of kept this theme going of overcoming a fixed mindset, working on building a growth mindset. And the imposter syndrome stuff plays into that, because a lot of times you can become, get in this fixed mindset and you don't know how to move, and you start believing things about yourself, which leads to imposter syndrome. So go back and check out the first episode, the episode 21, where we talked about embracing adversity. That plays in a lot to this. And then we had a follow-up to that episode with Coach Christina Hernandez, which was so
awesome.
good. It was incredible. I'm so glad we have that episode in this little 4-part series that we did in January. And so we're going to wrap up this episode by going through the last 2 of the 5. In the first episode, we talked about the perfectionist, the superhuman, the natural genius, and these are all ways that imposter syndrome are just categorized of how they show up in different people. It's not necessarily who you are, but what you are prone to feel when you feel like an imposter. And so, Eric, you have the list up. Let's keep going. What's number 4? We'll jump back into it.
And getting into these, as you said, we're going through this. It's more because when you can name it and kind of put a description around or kind of grab onto it, it gets easier to work on. It's about creating awareness here.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this next one is called the expert. So I'll give you the definition here. So the expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic. And they haven't mastered every step in the process. Because there is more for them to learn, they don't feel as if they reach the rank of expert. So they're put in the spot of expert, but they don't feel, I think that's almost like the true definition of imposter syndrome right there to me.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just the one I relate with the most.
I think that's
so in the fashion that we did it before, who struggles with this one?
Yeah, me.
Mary,
yeah,
Eric.
definitely me.
Yeah.
I would say this is
also, yeah, I think we need to say, because I was editing the last episode, I'm like, we did a hand raising exercise in an audio form of media, so if we can kind of do a roll call instead of raising our hands.
Damn it.
You can watch this on YouTube and Spotify, but I was like, oh, I can't believe none of us caught that. So I struggle with this one.
Yeah,
I struggle with it.
Me too. Me too.
And I think in the spectrum of all of the different imposter syndrome, this would be the lowest on for me.
For you? Yeah.
Really?
That's
because you read. That's because he reads everything.
yeah. The guy read like 4 books
3
last week.
3 books in the week
So-
over the weekend, and he says, "Read this book. It's really, really short." I'm like,
Yeah, and he sent us a message this morning.
I'm really
if everybody
sorry,
could have
okay.
this read by Monday, it's really short. And I looked at it, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's short, but for me, that's a book, man.
Well, so Austin, I want
Too
to
loud
hear
to read.
what your interpretation is then, because in the last episode you talked, you struggle with the natural genius side, but not with the expert side. So what's the delineation of those two in your head?
Yeah, I think if something is harder for me to learn, that's where it steps into that place of natural genius versus the expert, where if I'm in this place of expert, or I need to be the expert, I don't ever believe I am the expert because there's always more to learn. And at the same time, I don't necessarily put myself in a role that I need to be the expert in that category. I don't know why in my head there's a massive separation there, and I believe it's kind of tied to this idea that there's always more to learn. I will never truly be an expert in something to where I know that encompasses everything. And that belief keeps me from feeling that way. However, the natural genius side is if it's harder for me to learn, or if I'm incapable of doing it in a expected amount of time, that's where it shows up more. So just
you're okay with somebody saying, "Hey, you're not an expert in this," because you're like, "Yeah, obviously, I don't know if I ever will be." But if somebody's like, "You're too dumb to learn this," then that's where it's like you spiral.
yeah, and that's my own insecurity in my own head, right? I know I'm not an expert. I'm okay with that. And if someone said you're not an expert, I'll go, yeah, I'm going to strive to become one, but I'm not one.
And for me, I'm the opposite, because if somebody walked through my front door right now and said, "Hey, you're not an expert in plumbing," I would get so defensive and be like, "How dare you?" I have done approximately 2 hours of plumbing work in my life. How dare you assert? And I know that I could learn it, but don't tell me I'm not an expert in something, even though I absolutely not. I get defensive in that space. So, Eric and Mary, what's y'all's experience with this one, or how does it translate?
Especially with what we do, I truly believe we have to be an expert when we're teaching people. So in regards to the TKI, the advanced insights into our leadership training, we better know our shit when we walk out. And especially if we're asking people or teaching them a concept, we better know it. And so I guess that's where it shows up for me with new material. When I know it and I know it and I know it, I'm good. But when it's new material and I've researched and I've put myself through the process, and if it's not inside my head, underneath, I am shaking because I'm afraid that I'm not going to have the information or the answer.
Yeah.
This one has changed for me over the years. So I used to actually, I feel like very much where Mary's at, right? Walk in, the expectation is I'm working with your team. I'm supposed to know this, blah, blah, blah. And then somewhere along the way, actually, I don't like the word expert, but I actually felt like I really know this material. You know, I really know where this goes or know enough depth behind it. And for me, depth comes down to watching it play out and watching people struggle with it and then be able to help them through the struggle, right? So you're introducing a concept, let's say like the concept is emotional intelligence in the workplace. And when I first started doing that, I knew the book side of it, but I didn't know the application side of it. So I go in, I teach the book side of it, and then we do a process and I watch them all implode and I go, and I do the book debrief. So what happened? What did you feel? How does this apply to work? You know, and I do that. But the reality of, to me, being an expert is the ability when it goes completely off the rails and you're like, yeah, okay, been off the rails 100 times with this and know exactly how to bring it back. Yeah. And what I really learned along the way is I became an expert in facilitating experts' work. So I'm not the originator of emotional intelligence, so will never be that person. So I kind of, and when that started happening, which was just not too long ago, I started going, wow, I'm really good at and I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I mean, I've facilitated for 20 whatever years. I'm like, I'm okay at this. You know, I can hang with this. So then you take somebody's new work and they're an expert and I go, now I've got a scientist behind me while I get to facilitate their stuff. And I start to buy in, but I had to become an expert in something, like really feel it to get over this. And I didn't feel that till probably like 48, 46.
And he's 52.
Yes. Thank you, Mary. I was going to say that, but
he just had a birthday.
Yeah. But I'm like, okay, but I can genuinely feel a difference. And they say, you know, when you start getting into your 40s and 50s, you start to feel, that's what I think it is. It's that, you know, 10,000 reps of something, which I guess isn't exactly accurate, but it's like when you do it enough, then you start to really own certain pieces of it. And I would have never thought it would be facilitation, but anyway, so that's kind of where it is. I've never felt like an expert in anything till recently. And then in that becoming one, I realized as being an expert in one thing makes it so I don't need to be an expert in anything else. I can work off of that.
Yeah. You know, in regards to the expert, for me, I know that when my nerves are underneath, if I don't feel confident in my ability, confident in the material, I better be studying. And Eric makes fun of me because you know this. He goes, why do you doubt yourself? Yet I have to go through a whole system and a process, and I study and I read and I study and I read until I walk through the door and I'm like, okay, I'm grounded in this. But otherwise, if the nerves are there, I have to stop because I realize where I'm struggling is I don't feel like an expert. And I might know it, but if I'm not confident in the preparation, then I can spiral.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. You mentioned two words there, and it actually corresponds with like the Dunning-Kruger effect. For anybody listening who doesn't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, I just learned about this recently. It's the tendency of it is, yes. But it was a tendency of people with low ability in a specific area to give overly positive assessments of this ability, and it's really rooted in two keywords: confidence and competency. And so the Dunning-Kruger effect defines people with high levels of confidence with low levels of competency. And when that relationship between confidence and competency overcomes itself, you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you believe you are this way better than you are. Or, and I don't know if I'm not an expert at this, but if I'm not sure if it goes the other way around, but I think that is imposter syndrome. When you believe you are worse than your confidence puts it. You may have the competence, but you don't have the confidence. And so it's this interesting balancing act or balancing effect when it comes to imposter syndrome. That's interesting.
You know, so it's funny what you were just talking is, so we just got our franchise and certification in EOS. Okay. And I'm the one that got all that and went through it. But you walk out of any training, anybody's taking a training and you go through it and you're learning things. I am not as good as the guy that's been doing this for 20 years. as far as knowing the EOS material. And so my typical response to that, I'm expected to be an expert. So how I'm mitigating that is I walk in and set expectations. I'm new to this, but where it's different for me is that I know I have value. I know I'm good because of all going back to facilitation. I know how to manage material, other people's material. I know how to bring it to life. I'm good at that. So I can
And
go
you know
in.
how to ask questions. Holy cow,
Sure.
you can ask questions.
But so great. But so what's happening is I'm relying on one thing. I'm not an expert in EOS. I'm excited about it. I've learned a ton. I know more than the average person by far, but I haven't. There's some people that have memorized all 10 books and know all the things that are going on in there. So my point being, experts, I believe when we're talking about overcoming it, is first owning where we are and having the confidence to really own that position that we're in, and then stepping into what we are great at and bring that to the surface. At least for me, that seems to be how I'm compensating for that over the last couple of years.
I actually want to bring what you just said about the competence and the confidence. And I really believe where sometimes the imposter syndrome can show up when people know their shit and they've been doing well and they have the competence and their confidence is there, and something happens and they make a mistake and they fail. And all of a sudden their confidence just tanks. They still know it. They're still competent, but the confidence isn't there. And so they doubt themselves. And we see this within athletes. We see it within sales. That's happened with me in training, where I know it and I've had a really tough class and my confidence got shook. And then it's hard for me to step back in. So it's that piece is where, and I love to dig into this. So knowing the competent side, the expert says, no, you got this. What can we do to get the confidence there or the confidence back?
Well, I think awareness, like what Eric was saying, is a huge piece of that, because a lot of times, at least for me, like the biggest barrier in growth is not admitting like where I don't like admitting if I'm weak in some area. And if I don't like admitting it, that means I'm not going to work on it because I'm not going to put attention there. I want to ignore it for as long as possible. And so having that awareness of like, no, this is something that I struggle with, like what Eric was saying, like I'm not an expert in the US. I don't know everything there is to know. That unlocks the ability to actually put focus and like effort into it without there being that weird, shame or whatever that feeling is that blocks you from growing in that. Like I don't want that pain of feeling like I'm dumb there, so I'm not even going to address it. I'm just going to focus on what I'm good at. And like we were saying, that happens in athletics. Like if the wind gets knocked out of you, or that's when I've seen managers blow up at people.
Yeah.
When it's like, oh, you hit a tender spot in your heart or in your soul. You haven't addressed that because that's hard to address. And now it shows up because that one person like spoke back to you or whatever.
Yeah,
so
I think what you said was perfect there. You said, Mary, like, what do we do? I think sometimes we undervalue self-awareness to a certain degree, and that is the action here, is to understand, to admit that you have that tendency, but then also in the same breath to build that confidence, go, well, what am I confident in this ability, or what is causing me to lose that confidence, that not match my competency, and where that gap is. That's what we start identifying. So for Eric's point, that understanding of his lack of EOS pushes him to read the books and do the studying and commit the time because he's admitting that. And so I think sometimes, and this happens to me a lot, if I'm unwilling to admit my area because of a fear of anything, then I automatically put myself behind the 8 ball of I don't need to learn that, or I don't want to learn that, or I'm not going to learn that. And so that self-awareness, that admitting where you are and really understanding yourself in that is the first step. And I really think one of the only steps, because it leads to every other step.
It depends. So we're going confidence. Confidence comes from where we focus. So if we're focusing on, we think about the future and we're predicting something negative or something that's not what we're looking for, then it typically takes away our confidence as we step into it. So if I'm going to, we use your example of a class, right? You had a tough class, and which is still several things that were out of your control, right? Your voice went, all these things. I know the class you're talking about. And the reality is you go, okay, you can't control whether your voice were to go out completely and you don't have the ability to talk to people. Really hard to train people if, if that's where you're at.
There's no presence with no voice.
So if I look into the future, and you and I've talked a little about this, but not at this point. So this may fit or may not. But if you're looking and you're going to class and your fear is that your voice will go out again, and so you're concerned that you won't have the competence because you don't have the skill to be able to speak or talk in that, to be able to do everything that you do. If your fear is something that is out of your control and your focus is on something that's uncontrollable, you are going to experience nothing but anxiety, stress, and pressure because it's always out of control. You feel out of control, right? So the shift has to go from, if that were what you're doing, the shift has to go from, oh my gosh, I could lose my voice again, to the shift being, I have my voice, and everything that came about, the reason you lost your voice was because of sickness and all these other things that you had that went on. It was kind of a perfect storm, and that you went through it, and it's never going to happen again. Like the shift goes from the fear of what I can't control to what I can control. And you start getting into, if you had your voice, if certain things had gone differently in that class with your voice and the ability to do the things, would it have been a different outcome? Absolutely. Yeah. But if you don't believe that, if you were sitting there going, well, if I did have my voice, and there's this record playing, there's some story underneath, am I enough? Could I have done it? Or whatever that story is, and you're feeding the story with your focus on the uncontrollables, and you're justifying why you're not enough, instead of going the other way and going, okay, I am enough, here's why, and you're feeding into that. It gets down to that self-talk. Yeah. And I say all this because you're the one that taught me all this, by the way. This is all the stuff the doctors talk about. But when it's you and you feeling it, it's super hard. So we all experience this. We all go through it. It's actually really cool at this stage in your life and your career and who you are, that you get to go dig in. And I've watched you do it. This is the cool thing for those that are actually listening to this. Mary will get up. We will be on a training and we get like 4 hours of sleep. She gets up after 3 so that she can journal, work on her self-talk, get her everything straight. Like, she's that human. Yeah. So it's like, you're already doing the work. It's just buy into your work, buy into who you are. It'll be there. And then you just got to drop yourself in the saddle. It'll all show up. Anyway, I know there's a lot of people that deal with that. I've dealt with that, right? Is that the question, we just had something go sideways. How do you dig out of that? Exactly what you just taught the girls at beach volleyball this weekend. She did this whole segment on fear. It was fantastic. And it was like, basically, what you fear, go do. Yep. And when you go do it and you do it and you do it, you start getting results. But taking that first step of going and doing it feels like you're jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. And so you got to figure out how to step into that, which I know you're doing. But
well, and it's and to your point, and to all of this, yes, I'm working on this. I own that. And I also see it with so many other people. And, you know, Austin, you were talking about awareness. I believe that there's a different step with truly overcoming it. Is, yes, you have that personal awareness, but you find someone in your corner that you can be 100% with and say, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm working through, because now it takes it up a different notch.
Yeah. So maybe what I'm hearing is, and I love that. I love lists, by the way. Lists really help me. So I'm hearing we have to identify and admit that there is an issue somewhere. Yeah. Then we use self-awareness tools to identify what that gap is, whether confidence or competence. And we start to identify the direct things that we fear and where the gaps are showing up. Then, number 3, we find a person in our corner and that we can be fully transparent with, open and honest with, to help get that out So not just
And
to
that's
what's
the
in here.
hardest part. That is
that's
so hard.
Yeah, that's
It's one thing to admit it
I
to
was gonna
yourself.
say-
It's another thing to go, whoo, guess what? I'm struggling here.
Yeah, but I think that's when it becomes real, and that step is so vital. And then 4, I mean, Eric, I think you said this: is just do it. Do the very thing that's causing that confidence lack. And I think the only caveat there is when it is a confidence gap, not a competence gap. Because if it's a competence gap and you are extremely overconfident,
Ego.
I'm gonna go replumb my entire house. My confidence is back, baby.
The only thing in between 2 and 3 there is focus on the controllables.
Yeah.
So
The 1%.
Yeah. So if you can focus on the controllables, you start to gain the ability to move something. A lot of times people focus on the things they can't control.
Yeah.
You know, I am concerned about having a deep conversation with someone I care about, and you can't control their reaction. You can't control how they come back. But you can control how you engage with them, and are you planned out before you talk to them and things of that nature. So it's controllables help.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've accidentally wrapped up the main key points of dealing with all imposter syndromes, but we gotta let's hit the number 5, the last one, and then we'll go into an interesting thought that Austin had about what to do with imposter syndrome and how it should motivate.
So this last one's called the soloist.
Yeah, I've never heard. This is the one that's completely foreign to me. I don't know if I've heard this.
So it says, it's also possible to feel like an imposter if you've had to ask for help to reach a certain level of status. Since you couldn't get there on your own, you question your competence or abilities.
Does it show up if you don't like to ask for help?
I don't know. You didn't decide.
I feel like it'd be related in some way.
Yeah, I feel like it would be connected. However, I can say I've never asked anyone for help, so I'm just kidding.
He does the coffee mug. I'm proud of this.
I knew somebody was gonna. If nobody else went there, I was gonna go there next. So thanks for making that joke, getting it out of the way.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, say that again. So if you believe you cannot get there on your own and you have to ask for help, there's an imposter.
It's basically you had to ask for help, so you couldn't get there on your own. So you feel because you didn't get there on your own, you're an imposter. And I got to say, I can relate with this in my 20s hugely, and move past it. But and not saying that because I was young, it just that this was it. So
I never thought
so
about
I'll go
it
into
this
it what
way.
you guys are thinking. The reason, so I've always been an entrepreneur. I always want to start my own business and all that stuff. So my thought was, I have to start the business. I have to come up with a unique and innovative and perfect idea to run that business and make it successful for it all to work, which is so beyond not true. It's ridiculous and actually extremely rare for somebody to do that. It's really usually people are making incremental differentiations or slightly better or different products, or they've just got really good marketing on the same products, is usually how businesses run. However, there are these unique spinoffs, crazy new ideas. But I got advice from someone really successful, said, go get a job. That was the advice. Go get a job and work on somebody else's idea for a little bit and learn before you go start your next business. Because I started several and got my butt kicked. And so I did it, changed my life, and got rid of this soloist thing, which was I felt like I couldn't be successful unless it was all my idea to make it come forward.
You know, I don't know if so. For me, with soloists, what I've don't laugh, McGrath. What I've struggled with is thinking that if it's not me doing it, it will never get done. And that if I ask for help, people will let me down. That's not really that's not imposter.
No, that's trust issues.
I think
that is massive. Which is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, which
trust and control.
Which you've been going through with the 5 behaviors too. I think the figure in all the EOS material, which is really interesting, is they say 5% of people are that way, Eric. Like, and it's interesting.
Like able to do it on their own.
Are able to do all of the things on their own. 5% of people. And they're like, if you feel like you are that special unicorn that exists, you're most likely not. Yeah, like you're most likely not. And there's a reason that
the problem is like 70% of people think they're a unicorn.
Exactly. That's and I think
but I am the unicorn.
No, you're not. Stop it. Yes, you are a unicorn, babe. You are. No question.
That's what she gets up in the morning to journal just over and over again. I'm a unicorn.
I'm a unicorn. I'm a unicorn.
I've never said that about myself, though. That's a new affirmation.
There it is.
Just kidding.
I think we need to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect again, really quick here. But I think it's interesting. I would not say that this is something that I necessarily struggled with intentionally because I started so young in leadership. It was always, I knew I needed help and I needed people to help me get there. And I needed someone to show me the way, because if I was left on my own devices, I would fail. And so that was just the mindset that I grew up through. And I think I saw this, and this is an interesting one. I saw this with my dad. Actually, I don't have a great relationship with my dad. He is an entrepreneur, was an entrepreneur. I don't know. But this interesting part, and maybe that's why it's rooted in me. To your point, Mary, you said earlier, like, I've never thought about it like this. I have not thought about this. So this is full off the cuff. But thinking about my dad, that's what he thought. That's what he did. If he had to ask for help to get where he was, or if he had to ask for a loan to start his business, or if he saw that as not enough and that he couldn't provide enough, or he couldn't do enough, or he couldn't be enough on his own. And so he really never hired anyone that was of any high caliber, because it fed into that fear, or, and the list goes on. And ultimately he failed in a lot of the businesses that he ran. And I believe it's rooted in that. And so I saw that and ran the other direction and said, okay, I need help. I need to do those things. But as I examine and I've worked with other leaders, I see this, and I don't know if they would ever say it, but it's something's in there of just, I don't want to trust. I'm hesitant to bring people on. I'm insecure. And maybe it's rooted in this. I don't know. Never talked about it.
I think it's a performance thing, because as soon as you described it, I mean, I've seen this the most in new managers or new leaders or whatever, where, especially in Chick-fil-A, where it's like, hey, I walk down to the kitchen and they're dying, like physically and mentally. And I'm like, I was just around the corner. Why didn't you come ask for help? And there's this innate thing that whenever people get promoted into positions like that, where it's like, okay, now it's on me. Now it's on me to do it all. And it's like, that's not what the job was. Like, the job is to manage and lead people, but it's not that like you're cut off from the top. So I've seen this a lot in new managers and in students. When I taught, this came up a lot, where it was like, okay, and I think this relates to leaders and managers in the business as well, where it's like, okay, we're going to spend 2 days. I'm going to teach you this concept. And I would always have half a dozen to a dozen students say, okay, you've taught me this concept. Now it's on me to understand it and to apply it. And like, they just put their heads down, and I'm like, no, we're still in a classroom. Like, you still have the ability to ask questions and to get help from the person who has taught it to you. It's not just like, here, this is your thing now. This is your responsibility. So I don't know if I've ever been in that position like Austin, where I've never really been afraid to ask questions. I've had men in my life who taught me that it's okay to ask questions, but it's kind of a plague in the realm of new leaders and new managers when they're in that position. And I always put it as my responsibility as the leader to kind of to rectify that, and to be like, no, you need to be asking questions. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to be more disappointed if you don't ask me questions and you fail with something that I could have led you through and guided you through.
Yeah, this may be a little, the way you're talking, it just reminds me, this was years ago. So I grew up in a household, didn't have a whole lot of money. And the general mindset and philosophy was keep your head down, you're not heard, which never worked for me. I was always loud and obnoxious. But I'm glad I shifted later in life, but
What, that you're not loud and obnoxious?
You
Mary's like,
didn't
"I'm
need to
confused."
make that statement, Mary. We all knew where this was going. Okay. So no, and I read an article somewhere along the way, I don't remember where, but it was kind of the difference between kids that are raised in a more successful household and those that aren't. And the ones that aren't are really, we keep your head down. Kids are seen, not heard. They're not part of the discussions at the table. They're not part of the business. They're not part of that stuff. My dad and family generally worked that way. I was very rarely involved in any of that stuff. And then, so what happens is we don't have a voice when we get out there. We get in these meetings and we our job is to be quiet. Our job is to listen and be more servitudal, if that's a word, minded. And then I meet these people that come from these households where they were brought up to be in the meetings, to have a voice, that their voice matters. At 5 years old, they're going, well, why are you running your business that way? I mean, they were in those type of meetings.
Yeah, right.
And maybe not 5 years old, but you get the point. Yeah. And then they have this different thing as they get out there because the expectation is to step in. But growing up, for me, that connects to imposter syndrome because I grow up and it was like, oh, I'm not supposed to be speaking. I'm not supposed to be at the table. I'm not supposed to have an opinion.
Anyway, or it's like you're 8 years old and it's like, okay, you're the man of the house now. And you feel that weight. And it's like, I'm the only one who can do this. I can't ask for help, even if I could,
right?
Even if there was somebody. So, and you absolutely see that in adulthood of people being like, well, it's on me. Like I'm the only one.
Well, it's interesting that so Eric, with you bringing up your past, my dad always said, you don't let people know what's going on in our home.
Yeah.
And so you put your head down, but you don't ever share. You don't ever ask for help. You don't let people know. We need to have a whole podcast on trust issues and where they came from.
No, but not sound fun.
No.
Hey, I have a strategic meeting during.
I got meetings for the next 2 years. Whenever that's showing up, no,
but it's interesting how they're taught. Like I never thought of it this way. This is my brain, but that's where the solo part, I really believe, came from me, is because I had to figure it out. Mm-hmm. I couldn't let people in. I couldn't let people know what was truly going on. And you sweep it under the carpet, act like it isn't there, and you just keep going and going and going until all the wheels fall off. And it's just like face to face, like, oh shit, now I got to actually deal with this.
Yeah.
So I guess I do have some solo issues.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if, as we've talked about this, I'm not sure if the whole thing applies, but I do believe there's an aspect of this soloist tendency that shows up in every single person.
That's what this feels like. It's like the all-encompassing one to some degree, because it's like, oh, I'm supposed to be Superman, so I can't ask for help. I'm supposed to be a genius, so I can't ask for help. I'm supposed to be an expert or a perfectionist. Like it does feel like it's an overarching one.
This overarching theme in that we all struggle to some degree with this, because it goes into that confidence and competence, idea that I should have the competency that I shouldn't have. So therefore I'm not going to ask for help because I should be able to do this on my own. And if I don't do this on my own, then what does that say about me as a human? Yeah. Or we've learned from our past that we shouldn't ask for help. So therefore we suffer in silence or whatever that looks like. And I think it's an interesting world that no matter where we are on it, whether new leaders, and as we're sitting here talking, I'm going, well, dang, maybe I do. I do struggle asking for help because it should be on me. Now, the root of that comes out because of natural genius or perfectionism, or I tend to lean those more. But this idea of asking for help and receiving it and being open to what that may mean about your own ability or your own competency and your confidence, it is all entangled here. So,
I heard there's those two core fears. I think I've said this before, that fear that we're not going to be loved and fear that we're not enough. And if you look at the imposter syndrome, you can put all of those under a bucket. Either I'm not good enough. And if I'm not good enough, or if I make a mistake, or I don't know enough, then someone's not going to love me.
Well, this got heavy. So,
well, I'm about to go cry in the corner. So y'all just finish this up because she just nailed me. Because I mean, can we go around really quick, Connor, and just do a quick touch in on what's your greatest fear out of those two? I'm just kidding.
Where it came from, what was the moment? If you could describe that in detail.
Next episode of the Driven
Where did you learn it?
No, not doing it.
Our greatest secret and our largest fear.
I do want to, as I think we're getting to the end of this thing, I want to kind of do a little bow on it and go this. And it's not just new managers to me. The imposter syndrome shows up in the workplace all over the place. You know, it could be somebody just doing something, and it may be something that they've done before, and yet they have their self-doubt, they have their questions, they all these, and it shows up so much, and then it limits people from stepping into their full potential, because as we get in these spaces, we get hyper focused, and our brains get trained on what we don't want a lot of times.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just have to jump in here. I used to see this in sales when I was in a sales position, and we'd have to role play, and you get the best, like the top salespeople, and they're panicking because they have to role play. Underneath, they're afraid that they're doing it wrong, that they're not going to have the information, which is imposters. It shows up everywhere.
It was like, that was bad. What is going on?
Oh my God.
Like, I've seen
full
that.
Full out
so
panic attacks.
Yeah. Well, Austin, I know you had that thought that you heard on another podcast. Is that, can we tag it on the end here? Is it?
Yeah. No, it absolutely does kind of put this in a bow.
There's no other podcast.
True. Don't go listen to whatever I'm about to say.
We are the only ones.
You only find it here.
This is a unique thought.
No, but they were talking about imposter syndrome specifically in another realm. So not what types do we struggle with and how does it show up in leadership. But what's interesting is there's an active study going on by different PhDs in psychology, and they're studying the effects of imposter syndrome. And what they found is that when imposter syndrome is present and overcome, it means you're not succumbing to the negative thoughts, you're not getting into self-doubt and hypercritical nature, and you're not, shelling up, but you're pushing through that imposter syndrome and using it actually as motivation. Those people achieve more, they're more successful, and the most successful people have the tendency to be imposters and have the syndrome present in their life. What they're doing is really interesting to me, but they're taking these competency tests or their confidence test, and then they actually take the competency test. And so they take a test to say, do you feel confident in this arena? Do you feel confident that you could do this? And then based on those scores, then they give them a competency exam and they see the differences. And what's really interesting is it's present with a whole lot of people. And if it's not present, that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you have this misappropriation of confidence over competency. But in imposter syndrome, it drives you to learn more, to grow more effectively, to identify your areas of weakness, and to fill those gaps. Yeah. And so the hope that I got from hearing that, as being a person who raised their hand that you all could not see for the majority of the first podcast, was imposter syndrome may not go away. Imposter syndrome may always be an underlying current within the drive that I have to continue to succeed, to exceed expectations, or to accomplish something. Or depending on roles, it may be an undercurrent there. However, it actually may be a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing. It's how I choose to respond to it. And it's how I choose to react in it. And I thought that was really freeing for me, because for a long time it's been, I have to remove imposter syndrome. And then as it comes up, I'm a failure because, again, I have imposter syndrome. And it's here again, and I feel this way, I'm a failure, and I shouldn't have it. And so this really freeing thought is my ability to respond to it is the power of overcoming it, and is actually a good thing in the life of us as humans if we can manage it properly.
I mean, hey, it's like Christina said in the last episode, the storm clears the path, which
That's
is
a
really
good one.
cool. I like that one a lot.
Yeah.
And I think Christina, talking to her, because what you're talking about, bringing it all through like to the fixed versus growth mindset and like developing a growth mindset. Christina talked a lot because we asked her practically, like, how do you train to develop a growth mindset in athletes? And she said we first focus on behavior, and the behavior impacts the mental side of it. So what she didn't say was like, we don't come in and just sit down in a classroom and teach them the philosophy of fixed versus growth mindset. She was saying they go out in the court and they show them the behavior of what's holding them back, and then they work on the behavior. And so in this mindset of imposter syndrome, like, what are the behaviors that come up physically for you when you're stuck as a super person or an expert or a perfectionist, and how do you work on those behaviors? That to me was like a huge mindset shift, because it gets you out of like the headiness of, like what you're saying, Austin, like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be acting this way. I need to adjust what I'm feeling and thinking. And it's like, well, there are physical behaviors that come out of that, even if it's just like, I'm rooted to the spot, I'm frozen, I'm angry at people, I have a short fuse. Like, look at those things and how they come up in your life, and then work on adjusting that behavior as a way to adjust the imposter and to turn it into a positive thing for you, a growth mindset.
What?
We just did with the last 2 athletic classes, we're getting into fear. And, we're born with 2 core fears, fear of falling and fear of loud noises. And there's over 2,000 fears, and all of them are learned. It's so crazy. When you think about all the fears, they're learned. And so what happens with an imposter syndrome, underneath there's fears. There are fears. That's why they're there. And when you can address and identify, which we talked about, the awareness of where did this come from? So what is it? Where did I learn it? When you recognize where you learned it, where it came from, where it's limiting you, and then what you can do. And then there was a whole scorecard that we did on it. That is key for results. So understanding your imposter syndrome. So where did it come from? Where did you learn it? What can you do? What do you need to do? Focus on the controllables, like Eric was saying. When we focus on what we can do, and the best way to actually work through it, the storm, is to actually put yourself in places where you can fail again, where you feel it in a safe place, because the more you work through it that way and you see success, or you address it and you see, that's the way to come through it. Yeah. It's not that it will ever go away, because part of where we're at, our DNA is this protection mechanism, and we want to be good enough. And to recognize we're okay where we're at. Embrace it.
I feel like it can go away, though. I'm just saying. It may or may not. But I'm just saying, I feel like I've experienced that going away.
Yeah. I'm not. Well, the study's still happening. So, I don't know. And I believe that it's, from what I understood of it, and I am no expert here, but they, for the sake of the podcast, but from what it's looking like, is just a trend that they are seeing that could be correlated to imposter syndrome. Not that it, is it the causation, or is it just, an effect of, or is it just happenstance or coincidence? I don't think the studies are out there yet, but it's worth noting in us. I believe that it's worth noting regardless if it ever goes away or not. We have the ability to control our response in it, and it can be a positive in our life. It doesn't have to be a negative, depending on how we view it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
What you were saying, Mary, I thought is a quote that I use in all of our summit material, because it just keeps coming up and it doesn't ever go away, which is, we were talking about trust and the 5 behaviors first week, and it's understanding precedes acceptance, and acceptance precedes change. Like, if we don't understand it, we can't accept it. If we don't accept it, we can't change it. And so everything you just said goes directly into that whole mindset.
Whose quote is that?
I have no clue,
It's
and
Austin Hadel's quote.
no, it's not. I think that's actually. I think Brian said that from the Advanced Insights.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's.
Look at you got that right. It just took a whole podcast to get the Advanced Insights right.
Hey, well, no, that was Connor that was messing up the whole time.
Yeah,
I'm superhuman.
Kept
It's not. It doesn't take that long for me to get something so simple.
Well, we'll end on that note.
There it is. That's what happened.
We had about 5 bows on the end of there, so take your pick. And thanks for listening. Go back and check out all the ones from this month. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed kind of having this through line through January, starting the year off of how do we look at fixed versus growth mindset? How do you develop a growth mindset? It's been really cool. So we'll hit you back next week, everybody. We'll keep going. We're talking about personality tests next week, which is really exciting. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you guys for joining me. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.